The next item of business is one that we would prefer not to be holding, a motion of condolence in the name of Ruth Davidson following the death of David McClatchy, MSP. Can I remind members that there's a book of condolence which will be available for members to sign in the black and white corridor for the rest of the week. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Sheila and James and all of the McClatchy family to the gallery as Parliament pays our own tributes to David McClatchy. Thank you for being with us today. And for all of us who were at the funeral of David, can I just say to James that the eulogy that he gave about his father was the finest eulogy I have ever heard of a son to a father. David and I started together as part of the first intake of MSPs in 1999. In those early days, I would come into the chamber when I knew David was due to speak. He was always witty, clever, and a great debater, and I wished I could be like him. I had a great personal relationship with David. We were often on opposite sides of an issue, and we both served on the first Scotland Bill committee. I think it's fair to say that committee was more than occasionally fraught. It was regularly robust, and David and I were often at the heart of that. But through that long process, we used to pass each other notes to each other, commenting about the day's business, and always maintaining the good humour and total respect for each other's point of view. Despite failing health, he played a full part in parliamentary business, way beyond the time that some of us thought that he should, and those contributions were as robust and erudite as any of his previous contributions over the year. That was the mark of the man and demonstrates the commitment that David had for this Parliament. David always shone brightly in this chamber in particular, which I know he loved. We will all miss his contributions, and this place will be that bit dimmer without David McClatchy. Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The best of parliamentarians and the best of men, the death of David McClatchy leaves a hole that we will struggle to fill. I knew David for only a few short years. There are others in this chamber, those from the class of '99, who know him far better and far longer than I. And among my colleagues from our Conservative benches, there were some friendships lasting half a lifetime. And as we remember his political achievements, as we remark upon the size of his contribution to the life of this chamber and the democracy of our country, we must remember that politics was not David's first love, not even a close second. David's priority, first, last and always, was his family, and our condolences go out to his wife Sheila, his son James, mother Rena, and their wider family, so many of whom we welcome to the Chamber Gallery today. Because David was a man who was shaped and forged by his family, by his background, by his city. An Edinburgh boy, brought up near Meadowbank, he started out at Leith Academy Primary before winning a bursary for George Heriot's. There he attended the Literary and Debating Society, and though a portent for things to come, he claimed that his membership was only an excuse to sneak out to the nearby Captain's Bar for a pint after. He then did law at Edinburgh University, the first of his family to receive a higher education. He was selected as a Conservative candidate in Edinburgh Central in 1975, with a general election being anticipated the following year. Of course, that election would not come for another 4, which gave David the opportunity to work with his Labour opponent, the MP Robin Cook, on the No campaign of 1979, the irony of which David never tired of highlighting in later years. He completed his legal training at Shepherd and Wedderburn, and in 1980 he went on to join Toddsmurray, where he became a partner and established himself as a highly regarded expert in the field of tax planning, of trusts and estates. And it was this legal training, that intellectual rigour, that attention to detail, that discipline that David brought to this place when it was established in 1999. My colleague Mary Scanlon speaks for all of us when she says she always felt like a 10-year-old taking her jotters to the headmaster, waiting to see if a red pen would be scored across the page. Indeed, Presiding Officer, I fear that there is a great irony and dare I say, an impropriety in Parliament's tribute today. Always quick to castigate those who worship the false god of consensus, I can almost feel the spirit of David clamouring for an amendment to this motion, if only to correct a grammatical error. Much has been made since David's death of his contribution to the party and to Parliament as Conservative leader. the strength that he showed in 1997 after our electoral wipeout, stooping to build up our party with worn-out tools. The resilience to keep speaking his truth clearly, knowing that there was a space and a need for a right-of-centre voice in public debate. The reward of outperforming pundits' predictions in 1999, establishing a sizable Conservative group in this Parliament, and the personal pride that he rightly took 4 years later in winning his own Edinburgh Pentlands constituency first past the post. Despite the other leaders having parliamentary experience far exceeding his own, David was a debater of the first order who would often come out on top. And a personal highlight for me as a young journalist following this fledgling Parliament was his contribution upon the appointment of Des McNulty as a junior minister in 2002. During his speech, David managed to remind the Chamber there was but 123 reshuffling days left till dissolution. He consoled the mere 7 Labour members who had not yet been given a job in government. He commended and commented on the illegitimacy of John Reid as remarked upon in a taped conversation between Henry McLeish and Helen Liddell. He scored several substantive points on the then Criminal Justice Bill, and he cracked a fine joke about Jim and Dr. Richard's Wallace-Simpson partnership leading to an abdication. He did all this in under 2 minutes. It was an absolute tour de force. But David's contribution did not stop when he resigned leadership. Indeed, his period as Chief Whip and Business Manager during the last Parliament tested his political gifts, and his robust but honest approach gathered him many plaudits. David played with a straight bat, and he always did what he said he would do. It was in no small part to David's skill, his judgment, his ability to work with others, and his determination that this Parliament and this legislative process should proceed that ensured that the fragility of a minority government did not result in political paralysis. During that period, his long-standing PA, Anne, would often hear him on the phone to other business managers, eloquently and logically outlining the Conservative Party position and consequently how he would be voting. In the very next breath, he would continue, "And may I say that your voting position on this is totally at odds with your own policy," and a lecture on inconsistency would then follow. And he was not above trying to whip the other parties either. Once he was sure that his group was accounted for, he would start asking the other business managers if all of their MSPs were present and correct. And given David's propensity for checking every detail, he very often questioned the assurances that he was given. "What about so-and-so? I thought they were away for the day." On more than one occasion, he dispatched his parliamentary researcher, Martin, behind enemy lines to chat with friends on other corridors, just to make sure. In many respects, David was the first ever cross-party chief whip. But David's contribution to Parliament was not just in the chamber or in the committee rooms, as significant as those contributions were. He was clubbable, personable, generous with his time, his anecdotes and stories, generous with a drink at the bar and a friendly conversation with someone he may well have just eviscerated in the chamber. He added to the life of the Parliament, not just its business. No machine politician, he also had a life and interests outside of this place. Family, yes, golf too, and his beloved Heart of Midlothian. A regular Tynecastle attender, he would gently tease opponents such as the First Minister and John Swinney for being so-called plastic jambos by asking when was the last time they'd actually made it to a game. At his death, the Heart's message boards were filled with tributes. My favourite, saying, "He came across as a great jambo and a true gentleman." And it was right on both counts. I was thinking of the best words to describe David. Intelligent, forensic, principled, generous, humorous, loyal, pedantic, irascible, curmudgeonly, combative, but he had a charm and a warmth that drew people to him and took people with him. But the word that I would settle on is brave. David was brave to pick up the reins of a defeated party. He was brave to stand his ground, to speak his truth, to defy consensus. He was brave to bear the death of his wife, to give strength to his then teenage son. He was brave to love again, and he was brave in the face of his illness. I know that today, David would not want today to pass without due recognition given to you, Presiding Officer, and to the parliamentary staff whose support allowed him to attend this place until so recently, long past the time that many would have been able. That attendance and service takes a bravery too, and a strength, and I thank you for allowing that to happen. I thank also the many members of this Parliament, past and present, who have contacted myself and my Conservative colleagues to give their sympathies and to share their memories of David. He had friends on every side of this chamber, and it is a mark of his decency and generosity that some of the warmest tributes have come from his fiercest political opponents. In his death, Conservatives have lost a leader. MSPs have lost a colleague. We've all lost a friend. David McLetchie was the best of parliamentarians and the best of men, and this Parliament and this country is the poorer for his passing. It is with great sadness, but with great pride, that I formally move the motion in my name. Thank you.
Now call Alex Salmond, First Minister.
On behalf of the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government, let me join and support the motion by Ruth Davidson paying fond tribute to David McLetchie and of course expressing our condolences to his family with us here today, as Ruth Davidson put it, his first love. Now, David was a founding member of the Parliament. He was a respected, intelligent and witty advocate for his party. His political achievements were considerable. He did lead the Conservatives from a wipeout in 1997 to a secure footing in this Parliament, and I think by general acknowledgement allowed the Conservative Party to punch well above its numerical weight in that Parliament. I rather like David's description of his decision to become a parliamentary leader under such unpromising circumstances. He said it was a combination of a midlife career change and a midlife crisis. Well, whatever it was, he served this Parliament and his constituents as a man of character, experience and persistence. As we've heard, David was a gifted debater, and in 7 years as a party leader, he proved himself to be a worthy opponent for First Ministers and leading figures across the chamber. Whatever the issue, and he pursued many, from the Hollywood building project to education reforms to housing, David would draw on his legal skills to produce an effective cross-examination which always climaxed in a devastating political punchline. Like Ruth Davidson, I was drawn to these parliamentary masterpieces of speeches on which are fairly mundane matters and were pretty regular matters in these days of governmental changes, which David managed to turn into parliamentary classics. And there is a debate from a speech in 2002 which illustrates that very well. This was how David opened it. Here we are again with another ministerial reshuffle. Sometimes it seems there are more dropouts in the Scottish Executive than there were at Woodstock. I'm not sure if David was personally at Woodstock, but nonetheless, the point was well made. But the same speech goes on to deliver the absolute classic. Under he acknowledged that 3% of Scots believed that he was actually the Deputy First Minister. And this is how he responded. He said, "A worrying statistic. It means that as we speak, 150,000 people are walking around Scotland blaming me for Jim Wallace's mistakes." I would like to take this opportunity to state categorically for the official report that I take absolutely no responsibility for such failures. That was classic McLetchie. He was never shy in holding the government or his opponents to account, but equally he rarely lost the respect or friendship of any. It was a measure of the man that he never allowed personal political agreements to become just a personal disagreement. When Donald Dewar died in October 2000, David McLetchie paid tribute with characteristic eloquence. He made the point that one does not have to be of the same political persuasion as another to recognise in them someone who has ability, sincerity and conviction. These same words stand also for David himself. He was equally committed to serving his constituents and his country. It's a goal that we all share, even if we may differ on what the means should be. David and I did share two great loves, not just Heart of Midlothian Football Club, but golf as well. But I would say that it wasn't until he served as Tory business manager during that period of minority government I got to know him best. There, I think, his talents truly excelled. He always negotiated hard in his party's interests, but was also in the interests of the Parliament and effective government, and his word was absolutely his bond. In my estimation, that performance marks David as an outstanding politician of the devolution era. And there is no question that when the history of this Parliament comes to be written, David McCletchie's place will be assured. He had many, many qualities. He fought hard and passionately in everything he did, in politics and personally in his final battle with cancer. This Parliament is poorer, much poorer, without David McCletchie.
Jan Lamont.
Thank you. This is another sad day in the Scottish Parliament as we gather to reflect on the loss of David McCletchie, whose untimely death we deeply regret. On behalf of the Scottish Labour Party, may I offer our sincerest condolences to his family and friends who must feel his loss most fiercely, but also to recognise that David was a man who had a huge impact on people across this chamber and far beyond. As has been said, David, of course, was another of the 1990 group of MSPs who were given the task of lifting the Scottish Parliament from the dry words of a parliamentary act to a living, breathing part of Scotland's political, economic and social landscape. And he was a key player in helping the Scottish Parliament become that place. As has been said, David was a great parliamentarian, fierce in debate, unrelenting in deconstructing arguments which might have displayed any hint of inconsistency. He was logical, rational, and with a devastating turn of phrase. I still remember to this day the feeling of stress when I served as a minister, as I would see him rise to his feet in that languid way of his to deliver what we all feared would be the killer question. His wit and withering scorn were his greatest weapons, but I believe he deployed them not to belittle, but to make his case. Yes, he was tough in debate, but it was always the argument, not the person he pursued. And he was, of course, far more than simply a debater. In committee, his passion to make the Parliament work, to interrogate legislation, to develop policy was at its most evident. Always willing to do the heavy lifting, he took his job seriously, regardless of whether that work would be recognised or heralded by others. He did simply, I believe, want to make a difference. And David McCletchie always made you think. I often found him challenging me, and rather unsettling it was too for a Tory to be doing this to me, to test my own assumptions rather than presume them to be a self-evident truth. A useful lesson for us all, I think. I recall his capturing in a wonderful phrase the weakness of some of us here in Scotland's political environment when he said that we may now be living in a Scotland where that which is not banned will be compulsory. A man of intellect and wit, with interests far beyond politics, his life and legacy are hard fully to describe. What do I think when I think of David? At heart, when I think of David, I smile. For all our political differences, his humanity, compassion and interest in people were far stronger. He valued people, listened and revealed a warmth and friendship which could never be limited by party boundaries. Across this chamber, we shall miss his wisdom, his commitment and his love for life. And in conclusion, may I say this in echoing the words of the presiding officer. If there were ever a testimony to the person David was beyond this place, the man who wasn't simply a politician, it was to hear his son James at his funeral bravely and compellingly describing what David meant to his family through tough times and happy times. It is testimony to the way this man, this husband, father and son lived his life, that those who knew him best could speak so powerfully of his goodness and love for them. We shall miss David, and our thoughts today are for this good man taken too soon, and for those for whom this loss is so much greater still.
Willie Rennie.
Every morning on my way to my son's school, I would meet Jai T. Murphy out for his morning stroll. Jaiti was an old Fife miner, a coal miner, from deep working class roots in Lochore. Not someone you would imagine to be a natural Conservative supporter, but he was a David McCletchie supporter. Jaiti liked his straight talking, his forensic style, and Jaiti would tell me every single day how good David was. Such was David's widespread appeal. I too like David. only really got to know him as a fellow member of the Scotland Bill Committee. James Kelly, Richard Baker and I would work closely together with David, tapping into his knowledge and understanding of the territory. Often, subconsciously, we would physically look to David in the committee when faced with an unexpectedly tricky issue. I am sure our collective sighs of relief were audible when David came up with an inspired response to this difficult question. But occasionally, he said nothing, with a wicked glint in his eye. We would attempt scrabbling around and panicking to conjure up some kind of answer that would pale into insignificance to David's answer. Such was David's sense of humour. Earlier this year, we paid tribute to another pillar of this Parliament, Brian Adam. He was credited with helping to make minority government work for the first time in Holyrood when all expected it to fail. David McCletchie deserves equal praise for his role in ensuring it worked. As business manager for the Conservatives, he was able to reach out and build relationships with others that ensured the business could get done. And that feat was even more remarkable, as he had previously been in regular combat with the SNP as leader of the Scottish Conservatives. Such was David's versatility and intelligence. David was a towering figure who changed the future for the Scottish Conservatives and Scottish politics. Such was David's widespread appeal. Such was David's sense of humour. Such was David's versatility and intelligence. Such was David's many talents that he helped to change Scotland. What will we do without David McCletchie? Jaiti Murphy passed away a couple of years ago. David never had the opportunity to meet Jaiti down here, but I do like to think that you'll get to meet him up there, and they'll be having a drink and a laugh together. Thank you.
Margaret MacDonald.
Apologies. I first of all met the man when I was just a young cub reporter, and I was doing an interview with him. I haven't the faintest idea what it was about, but I remember thinking, that's a good guy. Too bad there's strikes against him. He's a Tory and he's a Jambo. But I later had reason to change my mind about him. Just before we came in here, we were both at a concert, a Yeehaw concert, Reba McEntire. He was as big a country fan as me. So therefore, we've started to talk about that and found that we had a great deal in common at that level. Because I have to tell you, although he was a wonderful debater, there's none better has graced this Parliament. He never let me in. And so I had a slight grin there. But I'm very, very grateful for one thing he once did tell me. I don't know whether all of you will remember, but we had an unseemly row, I think it was in the first Parliament, about whether or not we were worthy of our wages. And Scottish Television had done an opinion poll and found that the Scots thought we weren't. Well, quelle surprise. And I advised the Parliament on that day to ignore all of that. There had been rules laid down and we should stick to them, or else we can't inform other people how is to stick to the rules that we lay down. And Davy came up to me afterwards and he said, I think you did the Parliament a good turn today. The fact that he knew it and recognised it and told me about it was worth a great deal to me. I'll miss him, and so will we all.
Annabel Goldie.
Presiding Officer, may I thank you, the party leaders and Margaret MacDonald for all the kind and touching remarks which you have articulated this afternoon, spoken with affection and with grace, and I know his family will have been much comforted by all that has been said. My own first recollection of David McCletchie from a party meeting many years ago is hardly an extensive encapsulation of either his character or talents. That good-looking big Edinburgh lawyer chap with the glasses, I noted. Mind you, coming from a then Glasgow lawyer, that was in the realms of high praise. But even then, David made an immediate impression, leavening the universally dry fodder so characteristic of the business meetings of all parties. It was not only his analytical and forensic approach to all issues, he was dogged in his pursuit of what he believed to be right. And these attributes, in conjunction with an approach to political issues derived from basic principle and an unshakable commitment to his political beliefs, made him the effective and formidable political operator which he was. In politics, working relationships between colleagues in the same party are routine. We couldn't function without them. Real friendships within parties are perhaps a little less common, and across parties they are rarer still. And yet, in politics, David McCletchie cultivated and established all these different relationships. That is not easy to do, but as we have heard from the contributions this afternoon, even among his political opponents, he elicited respect and affection. When he became Scottish Conservative leader, these personal strengths of character served his party and his colleagues well. His first ever speech to this Parliament in 1999 had clarity, vision, and his trademark acerbity. And I quote from what he has said: "I am well aware that unless there is a sudden, widespread and highly unlikely outbreak of common sense, my candidacy for First Minister will not succeed this afternoon." He then articulated his vision for the Scottish Conservatives, that we should be a constructive opposition in this Parliament, dedicated to making it a success, and that we should aspire to government again in Scotland someday. And that is still the vision for my party, endorsed by both myself and Ruth Davidson as his successors. And David was unflagging in his endeavours to realise these ambitions. When I succeeded him, I could not have asked for a more supportive colleague. His counsel was sound. Any confidence I shared with him remained with him. He knew how solitary leadership can be. His friendship was comforting and reassuring, his integrity manifest. The one word I knew never to mention in his presence was consensus. To David, consensus was synonymous with fudge, dilution of intellectual rigour, and impairment of political purity. But he was pragmatic. As others have said, in 2007, when this Parliament first experienced minority government, there was a need for party business managers with honed political skills, razor-sharp minds, acutely sensitive political antennae, astute in judgment, and skilled in negotiation. I could not have been better served than I was by David McCletchie. He excelled, and not only his party, but this Parliament was a beneficiary. The touching and eloquent tributes which we have heard this afternoon reflect his enormous contribution to Scottish politics and our sorrow as politicians at the loss of a colleague, a gentleman and a friend.
I'm now going to allow a short period of suspension before we move to this afternoon's business. The Parliament will be suspended until 2:50.